From the mountains to the towering evergreens to our beautiful waterways, the Pacific Northwest is known for its breathtaking beauty, but it faces mounting environmental challenges. Thanks for joining us. I'm meteorologist Leah Pizzetti. Our Environment Northwest team is dedicated to covering topics that impact you across Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. We start in Washington's Puget Sound. Right now, thousands of tires are submerged or floating all across the sound and leaking toxins into the water, and Washington's Department of Natural Resources put them there. Farah Jadran looks at what it's costing to undo the damage done and how this happened in the first place.
When Jessica Alexanderson started scuba diving, her heart was set on finding beautiful marine life in Puget Sound. What she discovered was shocking.
It's just absolutely terrible. When I first started diving in 2014, I was like, what? Every single dive site I've ever been to has tires.
She's right. There are thousands of sunken tires at just about every popular dive site. Some have been there since the 1960s when the State Department of Natural Resources put them there. Along with other groups, thousands of tires were strung together in various shapes to mimic reef structures. But why?
They were targeting rockfish and they were targeting lingcod because there was kind of a dip in their population at the time that these tires were installed. So they were intended to boost these fish for recreational fishing purposes.
But researchers say there was no boost. DNR follow-up surveys to most areas showed the tire plan fell flat, and any potential harm to the health of the sound was already in motion.
I understand they're not decomposing.
Public Lands Commissioner Dave Upthegrove says concerns went beyond the tires themselves.
When the ropes that tied them together dissolve, and they can end up spreading out and actually damaging habitat and damaging wildlife instead of enhancing it over time.
Nearly 60 years later, new legislative funding is jump-starting work to finally get those tires out. In just one area, DNR removed about 2,500 tires by Tolmie State Park near the mouth of the Nisqually River. Commissioner Upthegrove says removing all the tires will likely cost more than $7 million. Putting tires in Puget Sound may simply not make sense to the average Washingtonian.
So it doesn't surprise me. At the time, it seemed like a good idea based on what they knew then, and now we're doing the best thing we can for salmon and orca and habitat based on what we know now.
They're chiselers with their teeth, and so if they're chiseling on the tire, that's going to be releasing small amounts of rubbers and all the chemicals that are in it. There's things breaking down over time, but then there's also animals that can break it down faster, and the urchins are actually one of those.
Marine biologist educators at places like Highline College's Mass Center Aquarium on Redondo Beach in Des Moines are relieved to see the decades-old tire plan reversed.
Every step is a positive step. The health of the Puget Sound, the health of our environment affects us. One of the reasons climate change is worse is because the environment is less healthy.
Back to the surface with Jessica Alexanderson and her dive buddy Eric Axelrod. They've found life thriving where past failed experiments have been corrected.
Unfortunately, there was a bunch of tires actually near where the octopus den was built, and we actually helped remove some of those tires. And right after we removed the tires is when she moved in. But the den is made out of rock structure.
As hundreds of the giant Pacific octopus eggs continue to hatch, lovers of our Pacific Northwest waters are reminded.
Here it goes.
Okay.
Consequences of the past run deep.
Most of the tires in Puget Sound look like this one, but there are a variety of sizes, including semi-truck tires. While many of these tires are starting to come out of Puget Sound, the DNR team tells me there's a major issue it's going to have to deal with. It's not really known exactly how many tires are in the Sound. That's because groups outside of DNR sunk tires of their own in areas not within state-owned aquatic lands. DNR believes there are about 100,000 tires in Puget Sound, but they estimate there's at least 30% more than that. That number could change as tire removals continue. King 5 will keep you updated. At Redondo Beach for Environment Northwest, I'm Farah Jadran.
There's a push to overturn a new Washington policy that is now in effect. It bans commercial fish farms in state waterways. Leaders at the Department of Natural Resources voted to ban the practice, but as I discovered, agencies from across Washington say the science does not support the ban. It's been nearly 8 years since a floating salmon farm broke loose near Cypress Island in Skagit County. 250,000 non-native Atlantic salmon got loose into the Salish Sea.
The collapse was a true act of negligence.
That was in 2017, but today there's public policy controversy stemming from that disaster. Since then, DNR has been phasing out net pens, first shifting to only growing native fish. Now, the agency has banned all commercial net pens in state waters.
These net pen fish farms on our state-owned aquatic lands, it was very clear there was impacts.
In her final meeting as Public Lands Commissioner, Hillary Franz put it to a vote. Critics saying DNR did not look at new science that shows net pens can be good and rushed the vote to happen before she left office.
The DNR rule was really rushed through in order to meet the time frame of the commissioner that was departing.
In the vote, 4 voted to ban the pens, but 2 members abstained, one saying she didn't have enough time to read the latest science.
I didn't feel comfortable casting a vote one way or the other. I felt like we could have had a little more conversation, particularly agency involvement in the conversation.
DNR's scientific report cited one 2022 study from the Department of Ecology that showed net pens can harm water quality, sensitive habitats, and species. But scientists throughout Western Washington say DNR did not consider the most up-to-date research that shows net pens can be good if maintained properly.
I can speak to the science of net pen aquaculture, and the science is very clear.
NOAA's Ken Kane is the research manager at the Manchester facility near Port Orchard.
It's clear that it's the most sustainable way to produce animal protein.
Kane says with this ban, the alternative is importing fish from other countries, leading to a larger carbon footprint, no control over standards, and more expensive fish for consumers.
In this country, we import almost 80% of the seafood that we consume, and that is not an environmentally sustainable way to do it.
Kane says scientists from multiple agencies have been monitoring the impacts of that 2017 spill and says there are no negative signs of Atlantic salmon impacts here locally, despite initial worries.
It didn't result in this catastrophic colonization of the Sound by Atlantic salmon like many seem to claim.
Jim Parsons is the president of the Northwest Aquaculture Alliance and CEO of Jamestown Seafood. Before the shutdown, Parsons says Puget Sound net pens produce the same quantity of fish that fishermen caught wild on the entire West Coast.
Net pens really represent a way for us to do this with low impacts to the environment when we compare it with other types of production.
A 2023 DNR document showed the agency intended to look at outside opinions before drafting a final plan, saying they'd tap the expertise of NOAA and the State Department of Fish and Wildlife. But when board members asked DNR about what other agencies helped in the final report and proposal, DNR said they relied on their own experts.
The expertise was all based in the department. Did you reach out to the other state agencies?
There wasn't any specific outreach that was done in this final phase, and my team is the experts.
We were not approached for comment.
Neither was the Department of Fish and Wildlife. Their chief scientist wrote in during the public comment period saying, quote, "In the absence of consulting with all the appropriate state agencies, DNR's analysis should be considered simply DNR's opinion rather than the best available science." Also divided on the ban, local tribes whose lives center around salmon. The Jamestown Sklallam tribe, based in Sequim, has openly been against the ban, adapting net pens into their culture.
Look, we're really into this. We really care. And we want to feed our people because the wild stock is not enough anymore. And if I can make fish right here locally that is healthy and good for my people, we're going to invest in that.
The Upper Skagit and Swinomish tribes and the Lummi Nation disagree, thanking Franz for her work.
We'd love to wrap her in this blanket and honor her.
At a ceremony to celebrate the ban, the tribe said their focus is keeping native salmon healthy.
From our ancestors, that salmon are as important as the air that we breathe.
It'll be a fight for years to come, I believe. But we're used to that as tribes. We will fight to protect the last fish.
A debate that many hope won't end here. DNR emphasized to me that it does not have to consult with other agencies. I'm also told that this ban could be reversed if DNR comes back to the table and decides to re-vote. Researchers in the Pacific Northwest are using light traps to monitor Washington's most valuable catch, Dungeness crab. Savannah Welch dives into how these traps work and how this is keeping an eye on such a vulnerable population.
You have to lift, rinse.
Did you get the little yellow ones right here?
And sift. That's what it takes to collect Dungeness crab larvae.
We're looking for zoea. They look like little mosquitoes, but they're actually crab babies.
4 times a week at the Mass Center Aquarium in Des Moines, researchers will pull light traps to collect samples, which will eventually...
It can take up to 5 years to get to this size, so harvestable size.
Look like this.
So the largest migration in the entire world happens every single night in our waters. Another little one that's yellow.
Ariel Wahab is a researcher at the aquarium. She says the purpose is to fill in gaps in population data.
Some of the fisheries were declining, and so there wasn't enough Dungeness crabs to support fisheries within that season. And so we are looking to see if we can actually predict harvest numbers 4 to 5 years in advance.
The Mass Center Aquarium is one of 68 sites under the Pacific Northwest Crab Research Group conducting this study. 6 years of data has already been collected. The traps are deployed across the Northwest, spanning from Tokeland to the Canadian border. The highest number of Dungeness crab larvae is captured in the central Salish Sea, while the lowest numbers are found in South Puget Sound. And there's a big need for this data. Parts of South Puget Sound have seen a 95% reduction in crab populations.
With so little biological data, it leaves the population super vulnerable to sudden unexpected changes in population levels due to changing environmental conditions or access to habitat, which we've seen in South Puget Sound. The population just crashed a few years ago and the fishery is still closed.
The traps are made using a bucket with an LED light strip inside that turns on at night. It's clear so the animals can see the light, and inside is a funnel that filters out larger animals. The trap mimics moonlight to attract the crab larvae. Once a sample is collected, the Dungeness crab larvae are counted, other species in the sample are identified, and everything is released back into the water.
And then we've got our end stars here, so you can see kind of the size difference.
The biological data is compiled and given to fishery managers. The traps are designed so that anyone can make one.
All the parts are stuff you can buy at any hardware store. We use the old water bottles. Yeah, pretty simple, easy to put together.
Ali Galeotto with the Puget Sound Restoration Fund tells me the research is mainly volunteer-based.
Anybody who's interested in becoming part of this network, collecting this type of data, seeing what's out in their local waters, can do that pretty easily.
The hope is that more people will join the effort to track and monitor Dungeness crab. For Environment Northwest, I'm Savannah Welch.
Back on land, King County is digging into a new way to make sure our local trees stay healthy even with changes in our climate. A new program takes seeds from warmer parts of the Northwest and brings them to Washington with the hope of giving them a better shot at survival. I checked it out. The rainy season is the perfect time to plant seedlings.
This is a Grand Fir plug.
This project is focused on the long-term warm, dry future, when Washington rain-resilient trees will suffer.
We know that climate change is coming. We're already seeing some hotter, drier summers, and we want to find trees that are adapted to hot, dry summers.
Paul Fisher and King County foresters are in Issaquah planting seedlings they think might do well in warmer climates.
Our conditions are changing. Maybe we can source seeds that are adapted, genetically adapted to drier, hotter conditions, but they're the same species that we grow here.
Kathleen Farley-Wolf says for the last few years, researchers have been looking at projections for how much warmer conditions could get in the future, then found regions in the Northwest that match those climate projections, including parts of Southwest Washington, along the Oregon coast, and into Northern California. They pulled seeds from the same species of trees already found in Western Washington. different only in that the seeds come from trees from those warmer climates already adapted to those conditions.
This is a control to compare how well our local stuff does.
They're planting the various types of trees from these regions side by side in test fields to see what grows best here.
So they need to be able to survive our wet and colder winters, but hopefully also can do better in these drier summers of the future.
And hopefully find solutions to worsening forest health, with a goal of discovering resilient trees that thrive here and eventually planting more in their 28,000 acres of forest land.
For me, this is one of the funnest projects to work on. I think we hear a lot of negative things about climate and it can cause people a lot of anxiety, and this is a case where we get to say, okay, how can we help set our forests up for the future? How can we set them up to be resilient?
They say they'll know within the next few years which trees from which regions do the best, but they'll keep monitoring them for the next decade. Up next, entire bee colonies are dying off in the Pacific Northwest, and researchers are not sure why. We'll show you how they're dealing with a big drop in numbers and how that impacts the Northwest agriculture industry. Plus, biologists are expecting an uptick in salmon in parts of the Pacific Northwest this year. While that sounds good, experts say it's not good enough. We'll explain why next. Beekeepers here in the Pacific Northwest are sounding the alarm about a sharp drop in the number of bee colonies. As Libby Dowsett with our Environment Northwest team explains, they're hoping scientists can help them find answers.
Many of these bees just arrived in Oregon from California in a big semi-truck after local beekeepers suffered massive losses.
I had about a 60% die out. Friends, 85% die out. I've heard 95% die out.
Andy Angstrom of Sheridan Apiaries Incorporated has been beekeeping for 40 years.
Making divides and selling some bees to other beekeepers that had losses.
He's had bad years, but this latest crisis has beekeepers all around the country in a bit of a fog.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of the mites and the viruses that are in the hives. The mites is a catalyst to the viruses.
He's hoping researchers at local universities will figure out what's getting to the bees.
We are still trying to understand what is happening and why these massive colony losses happened.
Priya Chakrabarty Basu, an associate professor at Washington State University, says researchers predict a 60 to 75% loss in the number of commercial honeybee colonies in 2025, and says it's significant. Fewer bees to pollinate our fruit trees means big losses for Oregon agriculture.
You're looking at cherries, you're looking at apples. For example, in Oregon, Central Oregon, Madras, huge carrot seed pollination.
She said everyone can help save the bees. Add some flowering plants to your yard. Leave some clear soil for ground nesters. And be mindful of chemicals you use outside. These bees are sensitive.
Biologists are predicting an above-average year for salmon returns in the Pacific Northwest. And while that's good news, it may not be good enough. Blair Best looks at what it will take to protect the population.
It's that time of year again for people like Kelly Burkhardt.
We're on our first voyage trip to go out and catch some salmon.
And they're not alone. Last week was busy at Chinook Landing in Fairview, Oregon, as people set out on the Columbia River to test their luck.
Kind of rocky.
But I think this year we have a good feeling, so we think we're going to get one today.
Day one's really slow, obviously. Hopefully it'll get better.
Biologists at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, just released this report, predicting that the number of Chinook salmon returning to the Snake and Upper Columbia Rivers in 2025 are above the 10-year average, which sounds great. However,
it's not great returns. It's not returns that I would think would allow recovery.
Brian Burke is a Seattle-based biologist who worked on the report, sampling young salmon once they first entered the ocean and using that data to forecast how many adult salmon will return a year or two later to spawn in Northwest rivers.
But the last 10 years for spring Chinook, fall Chinook, steelhead have been lower than, say, the average of the last 20 or the last 30 years.
The fish just are particular, and a lot of times, I think last season when we were out fishing, they were just really on a mission to go up to the dam or wherever they were heading to spawn. So I think you just have to be in the right place at the right time.
The NOAA report goes on to credit strong spring upwelling. That's when cool, nutrient-rich water rises to the top of the ocean, making for good salmon conditions.
What the ocean conditions in 23 and 24 imply for the number of fish coming back in 25 and in 26 is that it's about average.
So we're in that period of where the salmon are returning. So last year's numbers were pretty strong. Hoping this year's numbers will be pretty strong.
There have definitely been times in that period when returns were a lot higher than they're expected to be now.
The major contributing factors, Burke says, warmer ocean temperatures and a perceived increase in predators.
Well, if the water's too warm, they ain't going to come back.
Salmon don't have a choice to move where they're entering the ocean or where they're returning from. A lot of other organisms in the ocean, as it's warming, can shift their distributions. And so, predators and prey of salmon, as the ocean warms over, decades, they can just shift to northern areas that are in their optimal temperature range. Salmon don't really have that luxury.
This video, taken last week, shows a pod of orcas, also known as killer whales, along the Oregon coast in Depot Bay. These whales have been known to eat salmon, but it's hard to know for sure what they're after. Burke says tracking salmon predators is something NOAA struggles with, especially now with a lack of funding and staff.
When I present to, say, a group of managers and I say something like, hey, I think there's a lot of predation going on. I think that predation rates are going up. Often I'll get, a comment that's like, well, so what? There's nothing you could do about ocean predation. And I disagree. I think that we manage fisheries. We have Marine Mammal Protection Act. There are things that we're already doing to manage the ocean. But we're not managing it for survival of salmon.
A key piece in protecting Pacific Northwest salmon.
And with climate change, the system's changing, the things that are connected to salmon, whether it's prey or predators or spatial distributions, those things are all shifting. And if we're not out there studying that, we're going to have no idea how they're shifting.
All we can do is hope. I mean, that's why we call it fishing.
Still ahead, the University of Washington is trying to better predict when those iconic cherry blossoms will bloom every year. The new tool they're developing next. University of Washington students and scientists are wrapping up work on a new tool designed to help predict the timing of when cherry blossoms will reach peak bloom each year. I got a look at how it works.
It's a process that takes time.
We have several phases of what you might call green buds that the trees go through. One is just green buds. The other is when the florets are visible.
University of Washington PhD candidate Autumn Moss spends each winter collecting data for a spring phenomenon, the cherry blossom bloom.
I love the pink and white fluffy clouds of blossoms that pop in. It's spectacular.
UW scientists have been working to perfect a metric that will better predict the timing of the bloom. Their final research is now in review, set to be published this spring. The bloom research started in 2012, but to better understand the timing, students pulled historic data and visuals dating back to the mid-1960s.
There are two goals for this research project. One is to be able to predict with a certain degree of certainty when bloom will occur. And the second was to determine if there were any detectable shifts in when the bloom was occurring historically, dating back from 1966 to present. So are we seeing any changes in the bloom time through that 60-year time period?
This new research finalizes a tool that puts a metric on when the bloom will occur, which is used in tandem with the 10-day forecast. The second part of the research shows that the bloom timing is inching sooner thanks to warming weather.
As the climate continues to get warmer in the Pacific Northwest, the warming part is not a problem. It's reaching the sort of warming units that the trees need at an accelerated pace than they have historically. However, because our winters are so mild in the Pacific Northwest, they are also getting warmer. And so it's becoming harder for those trees to accrue the chilling units that they need.
The bloom now hits roughly a week and a half earlier than it did 60 years ago because of that warming trend. As Autumn wraps up her studies this spring, She says these findings should be a lesson for all who cherish these cherry trees.
The warming climate does have long and far-reaching effects on really everything that's going on, from both natural landscapes to horticultural landscapes like this one.
Thank you so much for joining us for this Environment Northwest special. To see all of our coverage, text the word environment to 206-448-4545 and we'll send you a link. We now leave you with this beautiful view over the tulips in Skagit County. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you next time.